A silver bracelet falls from shaking hands, striking the cafeteria's tile floor with a soft metallic sound that cuts through the disorder of toppled trays and strewn food. For a brief moment, the engraved inscription reflects the overhead lighting. To my little sister, be strong like I taught you. Half a minute afterward, 3 young men are sprawled across dining tables, their expressions showing disbelief and agony. Chocolate milk soaks Luca Morrison's expensive clothing. Blood flows through Sterling Wade's fingers as he holds his injured nose, and Dex Hamilton sits in a stupor on the ground, encircled by the scattered pieces of his former turkey sandwich. The cafeteria has gone completely quiet, save for the gentle sound of spilled beverages dripping onto the linoleum flooring. But half a minute prior to this scene, Harper Reynolds occupies a solitary corner table numbered 12, carefully slicing her apple into exact quarter-inch segments. Her light brown hair hangs forward like a veil around her features, forming a partition between herself and the 200 additional students filling Lincoln High's expansive cafeteria with their regular symphony of rumors, amusement, and social scheming. Her ocean-colored eyes remain directed downward, examining the pages of To Kill a Mockingbird positioned against her water container. The novel fulfills several functions: academic obligation, conversation prevention, and protection from the inquisitive glances that have tracked her through 21 days at this unfamiliar institution. Her actions display a precise efficiency, every motion controlled and measured, as though she's discovered that attracting notice can result in outcomes she'd prefer to prevent. The bracelet sits against her arm, its presence simultaneously soothing and agonizing. 24 months have elapsed since Ryan presented it to her on her 15th birthday. 14 days prior to the collision that changed her from somebody's sheltered younger sibling into somebody learning self-protection. The remembrance exists in physical memory now, emerging whenever her fingertips trace the carved letters during instances of tension or doubt. Harper consumes a small portion of apple, chewing deliberately while her side vision monitors the social interactions occurring throughout the space. 3 tables distant, the drama students argue their forthcoming show with fervent emotion. Close to the glass panels, the Academic Honor Society participants exchange study materials for their upcoming chemistry examination. At the room's nucleus, claiming the desirable territory that accompanies social supremacy, Luca Morrison presides over his typical followers. Should you already be detecting that something significant is approaching in this seemingly peaceful cafeteria, press that approval button and subscribe for additional stories that demonstrate how appearances can be catastrophically misleading. Believe me, you'll want to witness what occurs subsequently. Lincoln High functions on implicit hierarchies that dictate everything from seating configurations to academic funding opportunities. Harper absorbed this reality during her initial 7 days, observing how discussions halt when particular students walk past, how corridor movement flows around certain clusters like liquid around stones. She possesses no desire to ascend these social rankings or dispute these established systems. Her objective stays straightforward: complete her education without incident, prevent entanglements, and fulfill the commitment she expressed at Ryan's memorial service. Luca Morrison embodies everything Harper aims to evade. At 18 years old, he displays the type of traditional attractiveness that makes talent scouts enthusiastic and university recruiters overlook questionable scholastic records. His quarterback position provides him celebrity advantages within Lincoln's boundaries, while his father's role as mayor guarantees that lesser violations vanish from his official records with suspicious frequency. Additionally, Luca has cultivated a standing for accumulating attractive young women like prizes, showcasing them temporarily before pursuing fresher acquisitions. Sterling Wade occupies Luca's immediate right side. His angular features and analytical gaze imply the strategic thinking that enabled him to infiltrate the institution's grade database during sophomore year. His father's legal practice focuses on eliminating difficulties for affluent clients, a capability that Sterling has adopted and enhanced for adolescent purposes. When confidential information requires discovery or standings require demolition, Sterling supplies the investigation and planning that renders Luca's operations against social adversaries devastatingly successful. Dex Hamilton completes their threesome. His enormous physique controls the area surrounding their table like a geological formation. University talent evaluators have already appeared to address his defensive position opportunities, though none question the disciplinary documents that disappear from his records with questionable regularity. Dex comprehends that his physical superiority can achieve objectives that wealth and intellect cannot accomplish, rendering him essential for circumstances demanding intimidation or genuine force. Combined, they constitute what students secretly term the Trinity, though never within audible distance. For 3 academic years, they've preserved their standing through calculated brutality masked as innocent jokes, social control presented as supportive direction, and physical menace administered with grins that never illuminate their gaze. Educators admire their guidance characteristics. Guardians commend their civic engagement histories, and university acceptance personnel compete to enlist them for their distinguished programs. Harper maintains her focus on her book as Luca's amusement echoes throughout the cafeteria, sufficiently loud to guarantee everyone overhears his comment regarding first-year females and their ill-advised efforts to participate in varsity cheerleading. His listeners respond with the anxious amusement that follows. Comments that violate boundaries but originate from individuals too influential to confront openly. She identifies the sound from her earlier institutions where comparable clusters functioned with matching methods and similar protection from repercussions. The apple segment becomes tasteless in her mouth as conversation fragments arrive at her isolated table. Luca articulates his weekend intentions with aggressive excitement, describing the residential gathering his guardians will inadvertently facilitate while participating in their fundraising event. His tone conveys the relaxed presumption that his wishes will materialize simply because he's voiced them, an assurance developed from 17 years of having barriers eliminated and routes smoothed by parental resources and political associations. Harper completes her apple systematically, positioning the core in her brown paper container with movements implying military exactness rather than informal lunch disposal. Her water container stays 3/4 filled, arranged exactly aligned with her table's perimeter. The book shuts with a gentle whisper of pages settling together, and she examines her timepiece with the trained effectiveness of someone whose timetable functions on exact timing instead of social flexibility. 5 minutes persist before the lunch interval concludes, and she can retreat to her afternoon chemistry course, where atomic frameworks and equilibrated formulas offer sanctuary from the unpredictable elements of human exchange. Harper initiates collecting her possessions with the identical, systematic attention she directs to all her pursuits, each object locating its assigned space in her weathered canvas bag. The seat opposite her scrapes against linoleum as someone settles without permission. Harper's fingers halt in their precise organization of writing implements and notebooks. Physical recall initiating reactions that Ryan imparted during their evening instruction periods in their garage. Her respiration stays even, but her mass adjusts almost undetectably, establishing superior stability and arrangement for swift action if required. Mind if I join you? The voice transmits confident appeal wrapped around a presumption of acceptance, rather than an authentic inquiry requesting authorization. Harper elevates her gaze to encounter Luca Morrison's radiant smile, observing how his flawless teeth and rehearsed demeanor fail to reach his light blue eyes. She's confronted this specific combination of superficial appeal and fundamental coldness previously, in former institutions where comparable young men functioned with matching strategies and similar anticipations of achievement. Actually, I do mind, Harper replies, her tone conveying gentle steadfastness without the hesitation or flushing that generally follows exchanges with Lincoln High's favored individual. I prefer dining in solitude. The rejection manifests across Luca's characteristics like a machine analyzing unexpected information. His smile wavers for precisely 2 seconds before reconstructing with marginally less genuine warmth and substantially more calculated force. In his background, which extends 4 years of triumphant social control, young women reply to his notice with appreciation, enthusiasm, or anxious attraction. Outright denial constitutes a completely novel classification demanding examination and tactical modification. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Luca proceeds, positioning more securely into his selected seat notwithstanding her transparent objection. I'm Luca Morrison. My father is Mayor Morrison, and I'm the quarterback of our championship football team. I basically run the social scene here at Lincoln. His presentation adheres to recognized sequences refined through innumerable successful conquests, commencing with qualifications intended to overwhelm opposition through sheer social mass. Most young women react to this data by reconsidering their initial reluctance, acknowledging the tremendous benefits that accompany his endorsement and the destructive outcomes that pursue his rejection. Harper examines his countenance with the analytical detachment Ryan instructed her for evaluating potential dangers, recording characteristics that disclose personality beneath deliberately assembled appearances. Luca's costly haircut and brand-name garments imply limitless resources allocated toward sustaining appearances. His bearing exhibits assurance approaching conceit, while his gaze displays the strategic intelligence of someone habituated to controlling others for individual amusement. Fascinating, Harper states, returning to her book with movements that reject both his attendance and his qualifications with identical disregard. I'm Harper Reynolds. I'm new here, and I'd like to finish my lunch in peace. The rejection demonstrates even more explicit than her initial refusal, communicated with composed conviction that his position possesses no specific significance to her daily reality. Luca experiences something he's infrequently encountered since middle education: authentic bewilderment combined with injured self-regard. The emotional mixture activates protective reactions that circumvent his typical calculated strategy to human exchange. Sterling Wade materializes at Luca's shoulder with the silent competence that has rendered him invaluable for assembling intelligence and supplying reinforcement during sensitive social operations. His manifestation fulfills multiple objectives, exhibiting Luca's capabilities while establishing subtle psychological tension through augmented numbers and suggested threat intensification. Sorry about my friend here, Sterling interjects with practiced diplomacy, his voice carrying the polished tones that have argued his way out of detention facilities and into prohibited computer networks. He's not used to meeting girls with actual intelligence. I'm Sterling Wade. My father runs Wade Blackwood and Associates downtown. Harper identifies the legal firm's designation from regional television promotions, guaranteeing aggressive advocacy for personal harm situations and criminal protection. The family association clarifies Sterling's confident presumption that legal difficulties can be addressed through associations rather than fairness, a perspective that influences his method to regulation violation and outcome prevention. Congratulations on your genetic lottery success, Harper responds without raising her gaze from her book. Now both of you can leave me alone. Her fingers compress almost imperceptibly around her pencil as Dex Hamilton nears their table, his enormous frame projecting shadows across her meticulously arranged lunch area. The psychology of menace through physical attendance constitutes a strategy she comprehends from earlier encounters with comparable clusters where intensification pursues predictable sequences designed to overwhelm opposition through accumulated tension. Dex positions himself adjacent to the primary pathway, efficiently obstructing Harper's most straightforward route to the cafeteria, departure while preserving the impression of informal discussion rather than calculated entrapment. His attendance transforms their cordial conversation into something with more serious ramifications, implying that her persistent opposition might result in outcomes beyond social discomfort. Actually, Harper, Sterling states, stressing her designation with subtle derision designed to establish supremacy through acquaintance, I've been looking into your background since you started here 3 weeks ago. Interesting pattern of school transfers. Lincoln represents your 4th high school in 2 years. That's unusual for someone our age. The remark discloses investigative effort that transcends informal inquisitiveness, implying access to scholastic documents and individual data that should stay confidential. Harper identifies the method from earlier encounters where influential students utilized family associations to assemble ammunition for psychological conflict masked as social exchange. Her pencil fractures in two with a sharp snap that penetrates the cafeteria's surrounding sound like a firearm discharge. The fractured segments descend to the table as her fingers discharge them, producing small wooden pieces that move toward the perimeter before resolving into motionlessness. For 3 seconds, absolute silence envelops their table as the physical expression of internal tension becomes apparent to everyone within audible proximity. Some families move frequently when parents work for the government, Harper states, her voice sustaining steady regulation while her hands remain stationary on the table surface, especially when their work involves protecting communities from people who think rules don't apply to them. The reply transmits subtle suggestions about law enforcement and federal jurisdiction, indicating that her family history might incorporate resources capable of confronting local authority frameworks. Sterling's investigative assurance fluctuates marginally as he analyzes possibilities he hadn't contemplated during his preliminary investigation into her scholastic past. What would you execute if you were positioned in Harper's circumstances presently? Outnumbered and unmistakably being focused on by the most influential cluster in the institution. Would you attempt to reduce tension, resist, or something else completely? Inform me in the remarks below, because Harper's subsequent selection is approaching to alter everything. Luca inclines forward across the table, his facade of appealing refinement ultimately slipping to disclose something substantially harder beneath. The rejection has progressed beyond simple annoyance to constitute an active opposition to the social arrangement he's invested years establishing and sustaining through attentive implementation of incentives and penalties. Here's what's going to happen, he states, his voice descending to what he regards his most intimidating register. You're going to apologize for being rude to me and my friends. Then you're going to accept my invitation to dinner this weekend, or your remaining time at Lincoln High is going to become very unpleasant very quickly. The ultimatum pursues established sequences that have demonstrated successful against earlier targets, merging pseudo-romantic proposal with scarcely veiled warnings designed to generate compliance through apprehension. Most students comprehend that opposition to Luca's wishes results in methodical harassment that can obliterate scholastic achievement, social connections, and emotional health. Harper's water container topples as her elbow collides with it, dispatching liquid expanding across the table toward her book and dispersed pencil pieces. The overflow appears unintentional, but the timing implies anxious reaction to mounting tension from multiple origins. Water drips consistently from the table perimeter to the floor beneath, generating a rhythmic sound that accentuates the strain accumulating around their discussion. She rises with liquid elegance that implies either ballet instruction or something more functional, assembling her saturated possessions with movements that establish distance between herself and the three young men while appearing to merely address an regrettable mishap. The action compels them to gaze upward at her, subtly altering power interactions notwithstanding their numerical superiority and territorial command. Actually, Harper states, positioning her moist backpack over her shoulder while sustaining visual contact with each young man successively, here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave me alone, continue your little power games with people who care about your approval, and pretend this conversation never occurred. Her voice transmits gentle conviction that penetrates their presumptions about intimidation and submission. The warning communicated with such composed assurance generates momentary bewilderment among young men habituated to either immediate capitulation or fearful negotiation from their targets. Or what? Dex rumbles, his enormous hands positioning on the table like armaments awaiting deployment instructions. Harper descends to recover her dropped bracelet, her fingers closing around the silver chain with movements implying reverence rather than simple jewelry retrieval. When she straightens, something fundamental has transformed in her bearing and demeanor. The deliberate vulnerability she preserved throughout their discussion has disappeared, substituted by steady determination that renders all three young men unconsciously retreat backward. Or you'll discover that some people bite back harder than you expect, she states softly, proceeding toward the cafeteria departure with unhurried steps that imply complete assurance in her capability to manage whatever outcomes might pursue. The silver bracelet captures fluorescent illumination as she secures it around her arm, the engraved words positioned inward where exclusively she can interpret their commitment and reminder. Behind her, Luca Morrison stares at the expanding water discoloration on the table, analyzing the initial explicit opposition to his jurisdiction he's encountered since instituting his control over Lincoln High's social environment. The lunch signal sounds as Harper vanishes into the corridor crowd, abandoning three young men standing around a table covered in discharged water and fractured pencil pieces, already formulating the systematic annihilation of someone who ventured to propose that their influence might possess limitations. Sterling Wade's fingers navigate across his laptop keyboard during sixth period advanced government instruction, his screen positioned away from their substitute educator who remains absorbed in evaluating papers from another course. The institutional firewall that safeguards student documents constitutes a minor annoyance rather than a genuine obstacle for someone who acquired how to circumvent security networks before he acquired how to operate a vehicle. Harper Reynolds presents a puzzle that requires resolution. Most students at Lincoln High function within foreseeable boundaries, their histories containing standard components that Sterling can record and utilize within hours. Harper's digital presence, however, discloses discrepancies that imply either sophisticated privacy safeguarding or calculated information elimination by parties with capabilities beyond typical family resources. Her scholastic record displays relocations from distinguished establishments across 3 separate states, each transition occurring during winter intermission intervals that reduce disruption to her educational advancement. The timing implies careful organization rather than crisis relocations, though the fundamental reasons stay obscured by administrative terminology and secured documents that demand additional investigation. Sterling's specialized programming penetrates deeper into repositories that most secondary school students couldn't access with unlimited duration and professional assistance. Her standardized examination results position her in the 99th percentile for mathematical logic and reading understanding, while her extracurricular pursuits concentrate on individual endeavors rather than collective athletics or social associations. The configuration implies someone comfortable with separation and mistrustful of cluster interactions that necessitate confidence and exposure. The discovery arrives through cross-referencing regional newspaper collections with her earlier locations, disclosing a catastrophe that clarifies both her frequent relocations and her evident resistance to social tension. Ryan Reynolds, aged 19, perished in a solitary vehicle collision 2 years previously, while operating home from his siblings' debate team competition. The article portrays icy road circumstances and a sharp curve that claimed multiple existences that winter, but Sterling's trained vision captures particulars that imply additional intricacy. The collision transpired at 11:30 in the evening on a Friday night, considerably past the duration when secondary school debate competitions typically terminate. Police documents mentioned the discovery of an unregistered firearm in the vehicle destruction, though accusations were never submitted due to Ryan's death and absence of proof connecting the weapon to any criminal conduct. Most significantly, Harper invested 48 hours in protective confinement following the collision before being discharged to relatives who immediately registered her in a private boarding institution in another state. Sterling screenshots the pertinent articles and police documents, his excitement accumulating as he identifies the psychological advantage these discoveries supply. Harper's protective reactions during lunch imply deep emotional injuries surrounding her brother's death, establishing vulnerability that Luca can utilize with surgical exactness. The protective confinement particular suggests potential witness, condition, or federal participation that adds dimensions of intricacy to her history narrative. His investigation discloses one additional particular that transforms their harassment operation from informal entertainment into something with deeper satisfaction capability. Ryan Reynolds preserved a 4.0 grade average while obtaining his black belt in mixed martial arts, instructing self-protection courses at the regional community facility, and volunteering with at-risk youth initiatives. The obituary portrays him as someone devoted to safeguarding others, specifically his younger sibling, whom he trained in protective methods from age 12. This data generates a psychological profile that Sterling discovers particularly entertaining. Harper Reynolds transmits the guilt of surviving while her protector perished, merged with whatever capabilities he instructed her during their instruction periods. The combination implies someone capable of force but restrained by emotional trauma and moral conditioning that prevents her from utilizing aggressive resolutions to social difficulties. By the duration the concluding signal discharges students from their afternoon courses, Sterling has assembled a comprehensive file that will supply Luca with everything necessary to systematically obliterate Harper's carefully sustained emotional stability. The investigation discloses pressure locations that can be utilized with exactness, generating psychological torture that circumvents physical proof while imposing maximum damage to her mental health and scholastic achievement. Luca receives Sterling's discoveries during football practice, examining the printed abstracts between protective exercises, while Coach Patterson concentrates on conditioning activities for the approaching championship competition. The data confirms his initial intuitions about Harper's concealed vulnerabilities while supplying specific methods for dismantling her opposition to his jurisdiction. The subsequent morning arrives with unseasonably warm October climate that fills Lincoln High's passages with the restless vitality that follows unexpected temperature modifications. Students discard jackets and sweaters, generating a carnival environment that renders educators nostalgic for summer recess, and administrators anxious about behavioral occurrences that correlate with meteorological disruptions. Harper approaches her storage unit with the methodical competence that characterizes all her institution pursuits, arriving precisely 7 minutes before initial period commences to circumvent the congested chaos that follows last-minute arrivals. Her combination mechanism yields to practiced fingers that have memorized the progression through repetition rather than conscious exertion, disclosing the stark arrangement that administers her individual area. 3 photographs attached to the interior of her storage door capture instances from an existence that existed before catastrophe restructured her priorities and connections. The largest displays Ryan instructing her proper stance for protective arrangement, his hands directing her shoulders while she rehearses the footwork that might preserve her existence during dangerous encounters. The second depicts their family. During a camping expedition to Yellowstone, all 4 participants smiling with the easy assurance of individuals who believe their contentment constitutes permanent rather than temporary circumstances. The third photograph displays exclusively Ryan and Harper, captured during her 15th birthday observance 2 weeks before the collision. His arm positions protectively around her shoulders, while she exhibits the silver bracelet that now functions as her primary association to his memory and direction. The representation captures an instant of pure sibling affection, unmarked by the catastrophe that would transform their connection from present tense to past remembrance. Harper extracts her chemistry textbook and homework container with movements that reduce the duration her storage stays accessible, supplying minimal opportunity for inquisitive observers to record her individual possessions or emotional attachments. The photographs vanish behind closing metal as she completes her morning procedure and proceeds toward first period advanced chemistry with Professor Williams. The harassment commences subtly during her transition between second and third period courses. Someone collides into her in the congested corridor with sufficient force to disperse her books across the polished floor, generating obstacles for other students while compelling Harper to scramble for her possessions. The collision appears unintentional until she observes Dex Hamilton's distinctive size 14 sneakers among the feet, stepping deliberately around her dropped materials. Her chemistry homework receives a mysterious coating of honey during lunch, discovered when she opens her container to examine molecular framework diagrams before her afternoon examination. The adhesive substance renders 3 pages illegible, while generating adhesive difficulties that threaten to damage her other assignments. Harper addresses the disorder methodically in the nearest bathroom, utilizing paper towels and patience to salvage what she can, while accepting the forfeiture of effort that constituted 2 hours of careful preparation. The psychological conflict intensifies during her concluding course of the day when she discovers a printed photograph inserted between the pages of her literature anthology. The representation displays Ryan's collision location captured by someone with access to police proof files that should remain prohibited to law enforcement personnel. The photograph concentrates on twisted metal and fragmented glass, supplying graphic particulars that newspaper coverage excluded out of consideration for surviving family participants. Harper's fingers shake as she analyzes the representation's suggestions, identifying both the violation of her privacy and the message underlying its calculated positioning. Someone has invested significant exertion in investigating her history, obtaining access to sensitive materials, and timing their psychological assault for maximum emotional impact. The photograph constitutes a proclamation of conflict rather than simple harassment, necessitating reply rather than passive tolerance. She slips the representation into her backpack without examining it further, preserving her composure notwithstanding the acid sensation of resurfaced grief and violated memories. Ryan's voice resonates in her consciousness with guidance he shared during their evening instruction periods. Never let them see you break, little sister. Breaking happens in private. Fighting happens when you choose the time and place. The bracelet pulses against her arm as Harper counts her respiration and prepares for whatever intensification tomorrow will deliver. Luca Morrison and his crew have rendered their intentions transparent through actions that traverse lines between harassment and psychological mistreatment. Her commitment to Ryan necessitates that she tolerate their assaults while remaining faithful to the principles he instructed her about safeguarding others and selecting battles deliberately. But tolerance possesses boundaries, and Harper can perceive those limitations approaching with each calculated brutality designed to eliminate her emotional protections. The fractured pencil yesterday constituted a warning that her regulation might not demonstrate as absolute as she anticipated. Today's photograph implies her adversaries comprehend precisely which memories can transform restraint into fury, generating circumstances where even the most disciplined individual might reply with force that resolves difficulties through strength rather than wisdom. The institution day terminates with Harper proceeding toward the student parking area, her backpack heavy with books and the mass of determinations that will influence how the remainder of her duration at Lincoln High develops. Behind her, Sterling Wade uploads the collision location photograph to social media platforms where her classmates will encounter it without context or preparation, guaranteeing that tomorrow's institution day commences with everyone knowing about her family's catastrophe and her vulnerability to specific configurations of psychological tension. Luca Morrison observes from his BMW as Harper ascends into her modest sedan, already formulating the subsequent phase of their operation to fracture her opposition and institute his control over someone who ventured to propose his jurisdiction might possess boundaries. He has fractured stronger adversaries through patient implementation of tension to psychological vulnerable locations, and Harper Reynolds constitutes simply another target necessitating appropriate methods and sustained exertion. Neither of them identifies that Harper's instruction extends beyond the self-protection methods Ryan instructed her in their garage, or that her frequent institution relocations resulted from circumstances where her protective capabilities demonstrated more extensive than anyone anticipated. Tomorrow, we'll examine whether Luca's assurance in his influence demonstrates justified, or whether Harper's commitment to her brother incorporates provisions for safeguarding herself when peaceful resolutions become impossible. The silver bracelet captures afternoon sunlight as Harper initiates her vehicle engine, preparing for an evening of homework and memory, while somewhere across town, three young men formulate the obliteration of someone whose strength they have not yet acquired to accurately evaluate. The subsequent morning arrives with unseasonable warmth that transforms Lincoln High's passages into a furnace of teenage vitality and abbreviated tempers. Harper navigates the congested corridors with practiced competence, her backpack positioned tactically to safeguard against unintentional collisions that have become progressively frequent since her cafeteria confrontation with Luca's crew. Sterling Wade's investigation has produced fruit during the overnight hours, manifesting in whispered discussions that pursue Harper between courses like digital wildfire. The collision photographs circulate through cluster conversations and social media platforms, accompanied by captions that transform catastrophe into entertainment for students hungry for drama that doesn't directly threaten their own comfort areas. Did you see what happened to her brother? The whispers transmit through chemistry laboratory stations with surgical exactness designed to arrive at Harper's ears without supplying transparent targets for confrontation. Car accident 2 years ago. She was in the car when it happened. Harper preserves steady concentration on her molecular diagrams while peripheral consciousness monitors the arrangement of every student within striking proximity. The bracelet pulses against her arm with Ryan's remembered voice. Never let them see you break, little sister. Breaking happens in private. During third period literature, someone slides a manila envelope across her desk containing printed duplicates of police documents that should remain secured in proof files. The records disclose particulars about Ryan's collision that Harper has invested 2 years attempting to forget, accompanied by a handwritten notation in Luca's distinctive script. Tragic how weak people don't survive dangerous situations. Harper's pencil fractures between her fingers with a sound that penetrates Miss Henderson's lecture about symbolism in To Kill a She. Mockingbird. The fractured segments move across her desk as 12 heads rotate toward the sharp snap, generating precisely the type of notice she has labored to circumvent since arriving at Lincoln High. Miss Reynolds, is everything all right? Mrs. Henderson's concern transmits across the suddenly silent classroom while Harper analyzes the violation of privacy and desecration of memory contained within the envelope's contents. Fine. Mrs. Henderson, just need a new pencil. The reply emerges through compressed teeth as Harper compels her respiration to remain regulated. notwithstanding the acid sensation of fury accumulating behind her deliberate composure. The lunch interval delivers intensification that traverses every line Harper has instituted for acceptable conduct. She selects a table adjacent to the faculty supervision zone, anticipating proximity to jurisdiction might discourage explicit confrontation. The tactic backfires when Luca approaches with theatrical assurance, transporting a lunch tray that supplies cover for psychological conflict masked as informal discussion. He settles without permission, his attendance immediately attracting notice from students who identify the significance of his focused concentration on someone who has consistently rejected his advances. Sterling and Dex arrange themselves at nearby tables, generating a loose boundary that prevents easy departure while preserving plausible deniability about coordinated harassment. "Harper, we need to discuss your attitude problem," Luca commences, his voice transmitting sufficient volume to guarantee nearby students overhear every syllable. "Your brother Ryan would be disappointed seeing how rude you've become to people trying to be friendly." The mention of Ryan's designation strikes like a physical impact, causing Harper's fork to freeze halfway to her mouth as grief and fury compete for regulation of her emotional replies. The calculated brutality discloses how thoroughly Sterling's investigation has penetrated her psychological protections, identifying precisely which memories can transform restraint into reaction. "Leave my brother out of this," Harper replies quietly, her voice transmitting warning that renders several nearby students unconsciously incline away from their table. Luca's smile expands with genuine pleasure as he identifies the precise vulnerability his tactic was designed to utilize. "Did he teach you those self-defense moves before or after he crashed his car into that tree?" Because his defensive driving skills weren't exactly championship level, the fork distorts in Harper's grasp as muscle memory activates replies that Ryan drilled into her during hundreds of instruction hours, designed to override conscious hesitation during life-threatening circumstances. Her brother's death becomes an armament rotated against her, utilized to eliminate moral constraints that normally prevent force in civilized environments. "Maybe if he'd been stronger, he could have protected his little sister better," Sterling adds from his nearby table, his voice transmitting just sufficiently to guarantee Harper overhears every syllable. "Weak people don't survive dangerous situations." Harper rises with liquid motion that implies ballet instruction until observers note the flawless stability and ready arrangement that characterizes combat preparation, rather than artistic demonstration. Her backpack slides to the floor with calculated positioning that clears potential obstacles while supplying access to anything useful within its contents. "Stand up," she states quietly, her voice transmitting deadly composure that renders dozens of nearby students instinctively retreat from their tables. "If you want to talk about my brother, do it on your feet." The opposition constitutes precisely what Luca anticipated to provoke, transforming psychological harassment into physical confrontation, where his superiorities in dimension, numbers, and social standing should guarantee complete triumph. He rises with theatrical display, his height superiority allowing him to tower over Harper, an exhibition of control that has intimidated dozens of earlier targets. Mrs. Rodriguez, the lunchroom supervisor, observes the developing confrontation and commences moving toward their table with hurried steps that imply identification of impending force. Her approach generates the near-failure instant that threatens to derail Harper's reply before it can commence. "That's enough, both of you," Mrs. Rodriguez announces as she arrives at their table. "Miss Reynolds, return to your seat immediately. Mr. Morrison?" "You need to." "She's been threatening us all week," Luca interrupts with practiced innocence, his voice projecting concern that arrives at surrounding tables. "We've tried to be friendly, but she keeps talking about violence and making everyone uncomfortable." The accusation inverts the narrative with surgical exactness, transforming Luca from aggressor to casualty while arranging Harper as the unstable newcomer who presents a danger to Lincoln High's peaceful environment. Several students nod in apparent agreement, their replies implying either genuine belief or calculated support for the institution's social hierarchy. Mrs. Rodriguez rotates toward Harper with suspicion, substituting her earlier concern, identifying what appears to be a classic situation of new student acting out for notice. "Miss Reynolds, you'll need to come with me to the principal's office. This kind of disruption won't be tolerated." The injustice of being blamed for harassment she didn't initiate propels Harper beyond the fracturing location that Ryan's instruction was designed to institute. When jurisdiction figures align with abusers against casualties, protective measures become necessary, regardless of institutional outcomes or social rejection. Actually, Harper states, her voice penetrating through the cafeteria sound with crystal transparency, here's what really happened. She rotates toward the dozens of cellular telephones that have emerged to record whatever transpires subsequently, addressing her comments to the cameras that will preserve this instant for immediate transmission across social media platforms. Luca Morrison and his friends have spent days harassing me about my brother's death, vandalizing my property and threatening me with forged documents. The accusations hang in the atmosphere like smoke from discharged armaments while Harper arrives into her backpack to recover the envelope containing police documents and collision photographs. They obtained sealed police files illegally and used my family's tragedy to try to break me down psychologically. Sterling Wade abandons his observer arrangement to prevent further disclosures, moving toward Harper with aggressive intention that dozens of student cameras capture from multiple perspectives. She's lying. We never. Harper's chemistry textbook connects with Sterling's temple at precisely the velocity required to render him unconscious without causing permanent damage. The heavy volume contains sufficient mass to deliver devastating impact while remaining technically non-lethal, satisfying both tactical requirements and legal constraints that Ryan emphasized. During their instruction periods, Dex Hamilton charges forward with the momentum that has fractured offensive lines and classroom furniture, his enormous frame supplying intimidation that has cleared routes through congested corridors for 4 years. Harper sidesteps his rush while extending her leg at precisely the angle required to dispatch his own force into the nearest support pillar with an impact that shakes dust from ceiling tiles. Luca produces what appears to be a telescoping baton from his jacket pocket, the weapon implying premeditation that transforms harassment into assault with deadly armaments. The metal rod extends with mechanical exactness as he swings toward Harper's head with sufficient force to cause serious injury or death. Harper's protective reply flows from muscle memory that circumvents conscious decision-making, her right hand deflecting the armament while her left drives Luca's countenance into the lunch table with a sound like fracturing wood. Chocolate milk explodes across the surface as his unconscious body slides toward the floor, abandoning him motionless among dispersed food debris. The entire confrontation terminates in 8.3 seconds according to timestamps on dozens of student cellular telephones that capture every instant from multiple perspectives. Harper stands among the destruction of Lincoln High's most influential social cluster, her respiration regulated and her white sweater somehow remaining pristine notwithstanding the force that has just terminated. Principal Davidson arrives as sirens announce emergency reply vehicles approaching the institution's primary entrance. His evaluation discloses one young woman standing composedly among 3 unconscious young men surrounded by overturned furniture and dispersed proof that implies systematic harassment, intensifying into attempted assault. Everyone back away. Principal Davidson commands while extracting his radio to coordinate with arriving emergency personnel. Miss Reynolds, step away from the other students and remain where I can see you. Harper complies with liquid elegance, relocating to the designated arrangement while preserving visual contact with potential dangers and transparent access to emergency departures. Her arrangement exhibits continued tactical consciousness notwithstanding the termination of active combat, implying instruction that extends beyond simple self-protection methods at emergency. Medical personnel attend to the unconscious young men, while police personnel commence analyzing witness declarations from students, whose cellular telephone footage supplies comprehensive documentation of the entire confrontation. The video proof discloses systematic harassment intensifying into physical assault, pursued by protective reply that utilized minimal necessary force to neutralize multiple assailants. Officer Janet Murphy examines the clearest footage while interviewing Harper in Principal Davidson's office, her demeanor altering from suspicion to professional consideration as she identifies the exactness and restraint exhibited throughout the confrontation. Harper's actions pursue established legal precedents for self-protection against multiple assailants, particularly when attackers exhibit premeditation and armament possession. The investigation expands rapidly as video footage disperses across social media platforms, producing thousands of views and comments that transform a regional occurrence into viral content. Students from other institutions share comparable experiences with systematic harassment, while guardians demand clarifications for institutional failures that permitted such conduct to persist, unchecked. Mayor Morrison arrives at Lincoln High with legal advocacy and political influence that is addressed earlier, difficulties involving his son's aggressive conduct, his confident presumption that wealth and associations will reduce outcomes, faces unexpected obstacles when confronted with video, proof and armament accusations that surpass his jurisdiction to influence. This is clearly self-defense. Attorney Sarah Chen clarifies while examining the comprehensive documentation captured by student witnesses. 3 young men systematically harassed my client, obtained confidential materials through illegal means, and initiated assault with weapons in full view of multiple cameras. Federal authorities commence investigating how secured police files arrived at civilian hands, while additional students advance with testimony about harassment operations spanning multiple scholastic years. Jennifer Walsh, who relocated from Lincoln the earlier spring, supplies proof about psychological torture that propelled her to attempt suicide rather than persist tolerating daily humiliation designed to fracture her opposition. Within 72 hours, the investigation explodes into national headlines as video footage exhibits how privilege and institutional complicity enabled systematic mistreatment to persist unchecked. Financial documents disclose that Morrison family contributions influenced institution policies, while communication records expose coordination between institution administrators and affluent guardians to suppress earlier complaints. Luca Morrison confronts assault accusations, armament violations, and federal harassment crimes that eliminate his university prospects while guaranteeing criminal conviction regardless of his father's political associations. Sterling Wade discovers that infiltrating government repositories transmits prison sentences that affluent guardians cannot purchase away through charitable contributions. Dex Hamilton scholarship proposals vanish as universities distance themselves from students associated with documented harassment operations. Harper returns to courses after 2 days of administrative absence, though her condition as casualty rather than perpetrator becomes transparent when video proof eliminates any possibility of criminal accusations. The cafeteria erupts in spontaneous recognition when she enters for lunch, though she selects the identical corner table where everything commenced. Marcus Chen joins her without permission, his attendance supplying social validation that encourages other students to approach someone who demonstrated that even the most privileged intimidators confront outcomes when they focus on prepared adversaries. The discussion concentrates on normal teenage concerns rather than recent force, though Harper observes how many students glance toward her table with demeanors mixing admiration and anxious consideration. 3 weeks afterward, Harper occupies solitude in Miller's diner, examining chemistry homework while analyzing the ongoing ramifications of her actions. The bracelet captures lamplight as she traces molecular diagrams that appear simple compared to the social chemistry that transformed her from invisible outsider into reluctant symbol of opposition. Her telephone vibrates with a text from an unknown designation containing exclusively coordinates and a timestamp for subsequent Tuesday. The message implies that Lincoln High's authority frameworks extend beyond 3 young men whose criminal conduct has been exposed and penalized through legal channels rather than administrative discipline. Harper preserves the message while continuing her homework, identifying that her commitment to Ryan incorporates safeguarding other students from systematic mistreatment. The silver inscription captures her gaze as she closes her textbook. To my little sister, be strong like I taught you. Outside the diner's window, Lincoln High's illuminations shine across autumn darkness, while Harper Reynolds operates toward Dur. Whatever opposition awaits someone who demonstrated that strength sometimes necessitates action rather than patience, though selecting when and how to act remains the most difficult lesson her brother attempted to instruct her before exhausting time to complete her education in survival.